So thank you everyone for being here. Well, my name is Mark, and I'm going to share with you in the next 2 hours a small introduction about how to work with the React PHP and Drift PHP. This talk is not about fundamentals of React PHP, basically because you will find that information in YouTube, in several videos, and I'm sure that you will find a lot of literature about how React PHP works internally in terms of event, in terms of how to manage properly streams, etc., etc. So I've been working with React PHP for the last 1 year, a little bit more. No, 1 year, no, almost 2 years. And I learned a lot of things about how to work asynchronously and non-blocking in PHP. So the thing is that I've been working with Symfony for the last maybe 10 years, since the beginning of Symfony 2. And I was wondering how to work with that kind of PHP architecture of PHP way of programming on top of what Symfony means in terms of architecture, in terms of framework. So this is why some months ago I started working with a project called Drift PHP, and right now it's a small framework. It's not a micro framework, but a framework. So you can build websites, including APIs or website with Twig, on top of React PHP by using a kernel on top of Symfony components. So today here in that webinar, we are going to work on a small but real-life project. We will try to build something on top of Drift PHP, at the same time knowing how React PHP works. How can React PHP change your life if you're actually working on PHP? So yeah, that's what we are going to do today. First of all, I would like to make a question for everyone. The question is, first of all, do you know React PHP? Do you know how does it work? And the second question is basically if you know what's the main difference between React PHP and what we are going to call regular PHP. So these 2 hours, maybe 2 hours and a half, it's not going to be a conference. Basically, I'm not going to talk about everything and you're going to listen. I would like you to join me on that webinar, so you can ask me whatever you want. You can just stop me and ask me anything. You don't have to wait for me to stop talking. So please, if you have any question, just stop me and ask me whatever you want. So my question, do you know what React PHP is, and what's the main difference between React PHP and regular PHP? If there's anyone. Okay. So what does it mean? I mean, what does not blocking means? Okay, basically because regular PHP, I mean, when we talk about regular PHP, everything is regular PHP, but without working with React PHP, what we have is that we don't have any kind of workaround to make a HTTP request to another service outside our project, and in the meanwhile, before we have the result of that request, our PHP thread is actually waiting for that response. In PHP, when we talk about waiting, it means that the whole process is just stopped. And when we have a PHP process stopped, that means that we have an amount of memory that is actually blocked by this thread. So if we have a mind of just if we need more resources, we can just add resources. It doesn't matter. It's okay. But we as a programmers, we should always think about how to reduce the number of requisites, amount of resources we need for our project. So yeah, it's basically the difference between React PHP and PHP. In any of our projects, I'm sure that you are actually working with in-out operations. That means that instead of working with our PHP, we need something from the outside. It's what we talk about. It's when we talk about infrastructure layer. So we want to go to another service. We want to go to the file system. We want to go to MySQL, Redis, Elasticsearch, whatever. So any call of that, we have to go outside and wait until the result is available. So until that moment, we are actually blocking our PHP thread. So what React PHP actually does here is a small workaround. So in the meanwhile, before we have that resource, response, we can actually use the same PHP thread to do some other things. So what we have then is that our PHP thread is always working with our code, and we have a small stack with callbacks or operations that are actually waiting for a result. Okay, so that stack, I'm going to talk about React PHP, and I'm going to try to make you understand how it works. And instead of digging so much in the React PHP internals, I will try to explain it in a way that is not actually how React PHP works, but in a way that we all will be able to understand. Okay, so when we talk about a small stack with operations that are actually waiting for a result, it's not actually a stack. Okay, it's something on top of events. But for us to understand how it works, we are going to imagine a small stack where we are going to put there our operations that need something from the outside, and before they have that result, they're going to wait there. So our process is going to put that operations in that stack, and in the meanwhile, in our main thread, our PHP is going to manage all the other things that can actually do without waiting anything. So this is actually how React PHP works. It's not actually that way, but you try to imagine that thing. Okay. So the main difference between React PHP and a Symfony, for example, one of them is that, but we have another difference between React PHP or Drift in that case and Symfony. Do you know what's difference? What's another difference? Can you repeat, please? Well, yeah, try to imagine that Drift PHP is a Symfony on top of React PHP. Okay, so when I talk about Drift PHP, it's just a React PHP thread working with a kernel. So the main difference between React PHP and PHP, so React PHP and Symfony, for example, is that you can put that operations in a stack, so you can free always your main thread to work with our regular PHP. Okay, so we are actually doing a lot of PHP stuff with a single CPU instead of always waiting for external results. Okay, that's the main difference. But there is another one. So because we can actually do that in a single thread, in the single PHP thread, we can work with several requests at the same time. Okay, because they are not blocking. So in the same thread, we don't need to wait for our final response to start with the next request. Okay, we can send several requests at the same time, and we are going to receive response as soon as we have it, without blocking between them, okay? But there is another difference. So in terms of performance, we are going to increase so much our performance, not because of that's true, we're going to improve so much because of that, but there is another thing that we're going to improve by working with React PHP, and in that case, Drift PHP. Do you know what can be? Exactly, that's the point. We can make a workaround without React PHP for our kernel that it's called, that project that it's called PHP that's actually that. It creates a single kernel, and with the same kernel, it's going to process all the requests. But because it's not React PHP, but it's regular PHP, even using the same kernel, one request is going to be handled before, just after the last one, not concurrently, but just in series. Okay, so exactly, there is just one thread. It's called worker in PHP, and in the same thread, it's going to reuse the same kernel across among all the requests, but one by one. So because it's one by one, you can actually work with globals. You can actually work with a request stack, because you know exactly what's the order of the request. In React PHP, it's not that way, because maybe you have at the same time 2 requests at the same time in the same kernel, so they are going to use the same services instances, and you don't know exactly what the order they are going to use that services. So, for example, you should always use stateless services because you don't know the order. Okay, we are going to see it right now. So, do you have any questions? Remember that I like so much to talk with people. So if you have any question, please, you can ask me. Okay. Okay, let's continue. So on top of React PHP, what I thought while I was discovering React PHP is that everything is extremely okay with that project. So everything, I think that philosophy, without having to work with another stack that it's not PHP, you can actually make a huge step forward on terms of performance, even in PHP. So what happened to me is that I needed a bit more when I was talking about React PHP. So if I want to work with React PHP and I want to make enterprise applications, how to do that? So how to work with plugins, how to work with a container, how to work with auto-wiring, for example, auto-wiring. So this is why I thought that maybe working with a kernel on top of Symfony could be really good. So that was the seed of Drift PHP, and today I want to show you how to work with Drift PHP. Okay. So you will find Drift PHP. I'm sorry because I can only share my PHP storm. I cannot share my whole window, but you can find Drift PHP website, okay, in that GitHub. And in order to start, I'm going to clone the skeleton, okay. You can find the skeleton here. I'm going to share you in the general channel where to find that skeleton. Here. Okay, you can clone that project. Okay, so that's the skeleton here. So what we are going to do today is a small application that is going to be just, you know, a key value repository. So we are going to work with MySQL. We are going to work with repositories, and you will find what's the small differences between working with React PHP in our domain and working with regular PHP. Okay, so if you are used to working with Symfony, you will find that basically that skeleton is mainly almost the same. Okay, that is Symfony application. You will find here the source. Inside this folder, everything is exactly the same that in a Symfony application. Okay, you will have your domain, you will have your controller entry points, you will have your console commands entry points. So everything is going to be mostly the same, you will find out. Inside DriftPHP, inside Drift folder, you will find a kernel that is actually mostly the same that a Symfony kernel, but instead of extending a regular Symfony kernel, you will have to extend the Drift one that is based on the regular Symfony one. So inside the config files, you will find exactly the same that you will find in Symfony applications. You have your services here by using itovaring, for example. You will have your routes, exactly the same that in Symfony. You will have your bundles, exactly the same that in Symfony. And you will have the bootstrap that is exactly the same that in Symfony. Okay, you have the public folder, exactly the same way that in Symfony. And I want to show you what's basically the difference. You will find that Symfony components, okay, but you will have to load the HTTP kernel Drift component and the server one. So this is going to be your new kernel, that instead of having a method that it's called handle, you will have a new one that it's called async handle. Okay, it's almost the same, and you will find a server that you are going to see right now. Okay, so that project already comes with that server that is actually an emulation of what a production ready server could be. Okay, actually I'm working with a project that is called API Search that is built on top of Drift PHP, and in production I have that server directly being served in my container on Docker. So first of all, I want to update Composer. Okay, and as soon as I have that Composer, my Composer loaded all my requirements, I actually can load my server. I can run my server with a port that is where is going to be 8877. Okay, and that's it. Okay, then so I have my server here running, so I can make a curl 8877, and that's it. Okay, that's a server already, production ready server. So I think it's cool because you don't need anything else, and you can actually work in a very easy, simple way in localhost with the same infrastructure and the same configuration that you can actually deploy your application on production. So not actually. I mean, you could actually do that, but remember that one of the parts of that server is the port. So if you can actually create a supervisor, several instances of the same server and supervisor, and creating a new port for each one, yeah, you can do that. And you will have to create a balancer between them all. But in my experience, I've always worked with Docker. So if you create that server on the entry point on Docker, then Docker has already the mechanisms to make that balancing and to make that supervisor stuff. So yeah, I think that you could do that, but I'm not sure if that well, yeah, actually Docker can do that. Yeah, in fact, not Docker. What can do that is Kubernetes. So I'm actually working with Kubernetes, and Kubernetes has already does this thing. But yeah, actually, you could work with supervisor. In fact, there is a thing that actually I think that you can. Let me check one thing. You can actually work with not here. In fact, there is a way of creating several processes sharing the same port. There is a way, basically, because one of the last things I added in that server is that you can actually work with several workers. So the thing is that if you create that server, what you will have is that there is one process, and one process means one CPU. Okay, so if you want to make a benchmark with that server, there is a limitation, a logical limitation about how many requests that server can actually handle with one CPU. Okay, so with that, if I make an a patch benchmark testing, you will have 10,000 requests per second. Okay, but well, that is not actually production likely, because in production I'm not going to have a single process handling my requests. I'm going to have several ones. So if you make a benchmarking with a Symfony behind an Nginx, then you will have several workers in Nginx. So it's not fair. Instead of, maybe the word is not fair, but if you want to compare between both technologies, it's not fair, because we're comparing a Symfony with 16 CPUs working at the same time in concurrency. But in this case, you are only going to work with one CPU. So instead of that, you can actually work with 4 workers, and that's it. So this is actually working with with internal PHP functions. Fork, it's actually working with forks, and because they are working with forks, we actually have 4 sockets listening to the same port. So in that case, they are sharing the same port at the same time. So there is one way of sharing the same port among different PHP processes. In that case, no, there are 4 processes in the kernel, in the Unix kernel. So it's, if you have 4, in fact, you can actually do that with -1, and it's going to take as many processes as CPUs you have in your local host. Okay, what else? So we have our server running, okay, and we have the first. No, it's not. The first curl, you will have here a line that it's a get. It's for milliseconds, what can be fast. But what about the second one? Okay, we're talking about 544 microseconds. Maybe the third one is going to be a little bit less. Yeah, I've seen 77 microseconds in my computer. We can go up to 216 microseconds, and it's not about the time, but it's the time plus that it's not blocking. So it means that if you have 2 requests, the second request is not going to be waiting for the first request. even in the same process. Okay. So what we are having here is that we have a route. Okay, here we have a route that is actually going to default controller, and the default controller is actually something similar to Symfony. Okay, if you are not working actually with Symfony and you don't know how it works, you have a controller, and the controller needs to return a response, Symfony response. But one of the things, the unique things you need to learn about React PHP, and in that case in Drift PHP, the main difference is that everything, absolutely everything that works with in-out operations, instead of returning a result, it's going to return a promise of a result. Okay, working by promises, what we are doing is we are splitting all our code in small pieces called callbacks. Okay, so each callback, if it's actually waiting for a result that is actually produced by a method that is going to the outside, for example, a MySQL call. Okay, if there is a callback that is actually waiting for that code, the process is going to take that callback and it's going to put it in that stack. Okay, so other callbacks are going to be able to be executed. Okay, think about that. So if we are working with Redis, for example, all our code is going to be built on top of callbacks instead of promises. Okay, so a promise is just something like that. We have for example, we are with resolve, we are creating a promise that has already a result. So that could be the result of a Redis query. So we have A1, okay, and a promise has a method that is called then. Okay, so there is an anonymous function here, and the value that is injected in that anonymous function is the result of the previous one. So we will have here the number 1. We can do whatever we want with that value. We can return another thing if you want. So because that then produces a new promise, then you can do it once again. So we have a new value. So for example, if we have here something like that, this is actually that it's not going to work, of course, but it's for you. For example, a Redis. Okay, the main difference between regular PHP and React PHP based libraries is that all the operations that go to the outside, like that get, what is going to be response of that? What it returns? A value or a promise of a value? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. In fact, because it's a promise, you can do something like that. You can do that, okay? And result is going to be the result of that get. But because this is a promise, you're not actually executing that. You only have a callback. And that callback is going to be executed as soon as you have the value here. Because everything is built on top of that callbacks, you don't execute it at the beginning. You are going to be executing step by step that callbacks as soon as the previous callback has already a result. So what means that the previous one has a result? That means that has a result, or if we return a promise, having the result means that that promise has already a result. So if we do something like that, okay, if we do something like that, I want to return it. Okay, the next then is going to be executed when we are going to execute that. as soon as we have that value. Exactly, as soon as we have that value, and that value, we are going to have that value as soon as we have that value. That means as soon as we have that value. So this is going to be executed as soon as we have the value of get, but it's asynchronous. Okay, so all that functions, all that, all that promises are going to be, for example, created in our infrastructure, and we have to take that promises. We have to, by using then add some logic after that we have that value from Redis, for example, and at the end of the times, at the end of that chain, we are going to be back to that controller. Okay, so the difference between Drift Php and Symfony is basically one, that Symfony needs you to return a response from the controller, and instead of that, Drift PHP needs to return a promise of a response. Okay, this is basically the main difference between Drift PHP and controller. Okay, so in that case, you have to return something like that. Okay, a promise and the value. We have a value, it's a static value. Okay, but we can't do that. In fact, that could work. That's going to work basically because it's plain. So because it's plain, it doesn't block anything. But what if we have something like that? Okay, what if we have something like that? This is plain, this is not a promise. So you have to return, the response should have the value here. Okay, so you should do something like that. It's actually not working. This is not how React PHP works. But if you it's kind of Node.js, so you have to await the value here. We have a similar way of doing here. In React PHP, it's something similar. It's kind of, I think it's, we have actually, we need the loops, so we can actually do that. We put the loop here in the controller, and then we can. So this is going to work. Okay, we get the promise, and by doing that await, we are going to wait until the promise is solved, and we have the final result. But the difference is that that operation is blocking. So we're going to wait actually here. We're going to wait actually here before we have the result, until we have the result. So the main process is going to be blocked 1 second until we have the result from Redis. So if we are working with exactly one process, our process is going to be blocked 1 second. And being blocked means that absolutely anything, absolutely nothing can work during that blocking time. Okay, so this is not an option in React PHP. So the way of doing something like that is, instead of returning a JSON response, we could do something like that. Okay, that creates a promise, so we can do that. Okay, so because we need to return a promise that eventually it's returning a response, we can do that. The last promise is going to return a response, and in that case we already have the value here. Okay, that's the main difference between Drift PHP and Symfony. Okay, so we are going to see more actively what's the power of Drift PHP. So yeah. Well, yeah, maybe I'm not the good guy of making that response, basically because I have to be honest, I've never worked with Xdebug. And when I mean never, I mean that I don't even know how it works. I mean, never. Yeah, that works. That works. Actually, we are for the last weeks we started working with that issue. In working with that server by using run, it's going to work properly. I'm not sure if working with watch. I'm not sure that is going to work. We are actually seeing that watch is actually working with a second process. So working with Xdebug, I'm not sure. I think that we have to look for what's the response here, and as soon as we have something, I should document it. But I'm not. I think I can't answer you. I'm sorry. Well, in fact, it's actually PHP. I mean, it's not something different than PHP. So if you can do it in PHP, you can do it in React PHP. Exactly. I mean, you can do that, right? You can actually do that. You can actually look at that. Yeah, but the loop is just okay. It's not the reality indeed, okay, but it's the way I've always thought that it was, and for me it was very good to think about that in order to understand how works React PHP in terms of of real life, of real projects. A loop is just a while true. Okay, it's just a stack, and you go once and again for all the positions on that stack. So that's it. That's the loop. Okay, so eventually you're going to go there. So if you have here a breakpoint, it's exactly the same that in Symfony. In PHP, I'm sorry. So in that way, in that place, for example, you have an echo here. So I make a curl. No. Okay, I'm sorry here. Obviously. Obviously. No, I think it should work. Okay, that's it. You have here. So it's exactly the same. The unique problem I saw in React PHP, and this is something that in the future I would like to help solving that problem. And for me, it's a problem not from the library itself, but from the perspective of a developer. Is that when you have an exception, then the old stack about why that exception, where it comes from, all the stack that you have, it's pretty it's very hard to follow because everything is on top of promises and promises and promises. So it's very complicated to understand why did you arrive to that exception. Okay, but I think that in terms of Xdebug, there's no difference. Okay, so what about if I put something like, okay, let me check. Okay, what if I make something like that? Well, that's wrong, but it's exactly that, exactly the same that. If you work with a Redis, for example, the Redis extension on PHP, that is exactly the same. Okay, it's not 2 seconds, of course, but it's a blocking operation. Okay, so that could emulate a simple Symfony application, right? It's exactly the same. You have a very hard MySQL operations, and you need to wait for 2 seconds. Okay, so what is going to happen if I make that? We are going to wait 2 seconds, and we have a result. Okay, that's not bad. I mean, if you have a query that is so slow, then your request is going to last. It's going to last 2 seconds. I mean, you cannot work around that behavior, of course. Okay, but can you repeat? Well, yes, but not in Symfony. But in Symfony, that is the behavior. Okay, it's like a sleep. You're going to be blocked until you have the response. So if you make queries, of course what's exactly? You're going to last 2 seconds each, which is not bad because your MySQL is very slow. That's something reasonable, okay? But what if instead of, okay, let me make something like that. What if instead of having one, let me check. What happens here? Oh, okay, no. What about if instead of having one user at the same time, you have 2 concurrent? You have 2 concurrent calls. What is going to happen here? What if I execute both at the same time? What? Okay, so the first one is going to last 2 seconds, and the second is going to last 4 seconds. Cool, that's it. In Symfony, what we have is that if you have one process that is going to be your behavior, if you have 16 workers and you have 17 queries at the same time, well, the first one is going to last. The first 16 are going to last 60 seconds, 2 seconds, but the 17th is going to last 4 seconds. Okay. Well, it's not about CPUs because the same operating system is going to reuse that CPUs for other processes. But in terms of memory, you are absolutely right, because the memory is actually being reserved by the PHP process. So that's exactly what it happens. That if you have 2 gigabytes reserved for your processes, maybe the 95% of the time your processes are going to waste that 2 gigabytes of memory. That's exactly the point. So even if you have tons of available CPUs, if you need to scale that, it means that you're going to use a lot of memory. So at the end of the month, this is money, okay? That's the point. So what about if you emulate a Redis operation on top of React PHP? Okay. I told before that was a blocking operation. It's not truth. The blocking operation is called block. Okay, it's not a wait. A wait is asynchronous. it's not blocking operation. The wait, it's called the block. There is a small library on top of React PHP that actually blocks. It's not a wait, I'm sorry, it was a mistake. So instead of making a sleep, we're going to emulate a Redis operation on top of React PHP. So it's called right now. That's true. Okay, it's going to be exactly. It's going to be 2. This loop. Okay. No, it's sleep is in seconds. What do you mean 2000? No, it's in seconds. Yeah, maybe it could be time in seconds. Yeah, there is another one that's a sleep, but that sleep, it's the same sleep than in PHP. Okay, because this is non-blocking, that sleep, it's going to return you a promise. Okay, so this is going to be executed 2 seconds after that execution. So in that, you have exactly that. And that operation that then creates a new promise that we need to return it here. In fact, we can actually use directly that because we don't need that value. Okay, it's exactly the same. We sleep 2 seconds in a non-blocking way, so that could be a non-blocking Redis operation. And after 2 seconds, you return the response. So what's going to be the main difference between that scenario and the last one? Exactly. Even if I make it at the same time. Okay, so both are going to last 2 seconds, of course, but both are going to be resolved at the same time. Yeah, well, no, of course not. No, then, no, no. I'm sorry, if you want me to explain how to reduce that 2 seconds, maybe that's not the video, right? Maybe I'm not an expert of MySQL or Redis, I'm sorry. So, absolutely. Exactly. I mean, and even better, working with promises, it's not faster, but it's slower. Basically, because instead of having regular PHP code, you have something on top of a new library that is called promises. So instead of executing the same code, just your code, you're going to execute an event loop. You're going to execute, all the callbacks. You're going to execute them all. So at the end, you're going to execute for the same request more code. So it's slower. It's not much slower, but it's less efficient in that way. But it's not important if you see the big picture. Okay. I'm not a marketing guy. My marketing tools are my project that it's called API Search. So I can tell you that even with that, working with Drift PHP and React PHP, it's really amazing, but not because I can tell you that it's the fastest thing in the world, but because working with final products, it's actually bringing you what you expect from it. So this is the best thing. This is the best thing that someone can tell about a product, that the product is actually giving you what you expect from it. And React PHP is actually doing that pretty good from my point of view. So, okay, let's go with the project. Okay, how I can, okay. What we are going to make here is a small application, okay. Okay. In that application, I'm going to use command bus. So someone can ask me why, if we can use some existing command bus like the Symfony one, for example, the messenger component, and my answer is no. Do you know why? Could be that. Why we cannot? Well, that's exactly the unique answer for that question. And in a command bus, where could you find a blocking operation? That's a hard question. Exactly. So a command bus, one of the features that a command bus can bring you is to take the write operations and put them in a queue system to make them asynchronously. So in Messenger, you can do it with several adapters, and two of them are RabbitMQ and Redis. So if you work with that adapters, they are not going to be available for you. Basically because in React PHP, you're not going to be able to use the RabbitMQ PHP library. You're not going to be able to use the Redis PHP library because all of them are using actually blocking operations. Okay, you are not able to use them. You should never use the RabbitMQ PHP library. Never. You are able, it's something impossible to use it? No, it's not about good practices. It's about you can't do that. Basically because with a single file get contents in your PHP, in your Drift PHP server, a single file get contents, if that file get contents that it's a blocking operation lasts 1 second, then your whole server is going to block 1 second. So even a small blocking operation can really make a mess in your server. So yes, well, in my perspective, that you can't do that. I mean, yeah, for my experience, if you make that exercise of provide the possibility of doing something like that, then the 50% of the people is going to use it in production. So to be honest, I prefer to tell it it's not possible, and that's better for everyone. Of course, you can make a sleep one. Of course, you can do that. But if you want to make it properly, then I'm sure that you don't want to. Well, it's a bit dangerous. Absolutely, that could exist a small mechanism to just block all that operations and forbid it somehow. If you or maybe detect it. I mean, just look for blocking operations and don't let you start even the server if you find something. Yeah. So working with RabbitMQ with command bus, you can actually work with one of the Drift PHP components that it's called obviously command bus. So Drift PHP is built on top of Symfony, so that means that you can actually use the same bundle philosophy and the same bundle architecture. So if you make something like that and you update the composer, okay, it's going to install the bus, and you can actually, it's exactly the same. That's it. So you have the bus here already. Okay. So in that case, we are going to have two endpoints. The first one, it's going to be for putting a value given a key. Okay, and the second one is going to be retrieve a value given a key. Okay, that's simple. So let's start with a little bit of code here. Okay, we can start with that controller. We're going to rename it. We're going to remove that dependencies. We're going to put value controller. Exactly. Okay. Okay. That bundle is going to provide you some services. The first one is going to call command bus. Okay. And that command bus is already built on top of promises. So that means that the value is going to be always a promise. Okay. Auto warring here works properly. So we have already injected our command bus. And what we have here is something like that. Okay, we have to execute a command. So inside our domain, this is my way of working. I'm really sure that all of you have different ways of making your domain architecture. In my case, I like to put it common, a folder that's called command, and a folder that's called command handler. I'm not actually working with application layer because after so many years, I don't even understand why application layer is there. So in my case, I go directly by using that bus from the infrastructure to the domain. And because of dependencies, layer dependencies, my transportation objects are inside domain. So in that case, we're going to have here a small command that it's called put value, right? And put value, it's a string that it's called key, a string that it's called value, okay, our constructor and our getters. So our command handler is exactly put value handler, and we have a that's it. What it's going to return that? What returns a handler of a command? Okay. Why a promise? Yeah, if you put it promises, you don't actually say that what is going to return. It's just a promise. PHP is not ready for defining that inside the promise that should be a string, for example. Why returning a promise if we are actually working with a handler of a comment, and a comment should never return anything? why we should return here I promise. So no, in a comment you don't have that information. In fact, yeah, but remember that we are actually working with React PHP. So that promise here could be something like that. Inside a promise, you have the final value, and the final value in a command is void. So the difference here is that even if you don't want to take the value, the response value of the command handler, you should wait for the command handler to finish, right? So the promise is because if you want to return the response in the controller saying, oh, everything went okay, or even I put your comment in a queue, you want to respond that after that happens, even if you don't want to take the value of the response. So by working with a promise, you're going to be able at the end to do something after that promise is resolved, even if you don't have anything in there. In fact, we're going to have a void here. Okay, so at the end, you have to return I promise here. So what is going to do that handle of a put value? What you have to do here? Well, in that case, we are going to use MySQL, not Redis. So you would put here MySQL directly. Exactly. Okay. Let me put that. I would never put that in my domain. I would put model here inside, but I'm going to put repository because in that the architecture here doesn't matter much. So no. I'm going to work with an interface. Yeah. Key value key value repository. That's actually an interface. So what's in that repository, we're going to have a method that it's going to be called, for example, maybe put key value, right? We have a string. Okay, it's a key. We have a string that is a value. Okay, and what is going to return? Yeah, always going to be return a promise, no matter what's the adapter of the interface, and no matter if that adapter already needs that promise, because it's actually asynchronous and non-blocking. Okay, so it should always return a promise. Exactly. So now that we are defining that interface, we can define the other method. It's going to be named get key value, right? And having a key, we return that value. So what are we going to return here? Yeah, no, it's just a value. Okay, perfect. Good catch. Anything else? Do you see anything weird here? There is something weird here. Okay, there is something that could just return some exception. And what happens if there is no key? Okay, you can do that. okay? But it's not, maybe it's not the best approach here. I would go for a exception, okay? Like key not found. Basically because I'm going to explain as well how to manage exceptions. Okay, it extends exception. And working with that exception, what we have here is that it is going to return a promise of a string, and it can return a promise of that exception as well. Okay, both are exceptions, but both are different exceptions. And both exceptions, both promises are going to be handled in different ways. Okay, I'm going to show it a little bit later. So this is actually working. And if you work in terms of definition in PHP, you don't need any adapter of that interface to work with that. So in our handler, we're going to inject that interface. Okay, key value repository, key value repository. You can inject it. As you can see, this is something that you could do exactly the same way in Symfony. There's no difference. And in that case, you can actually call the repository, and you can put the value, put value get key, put value get value. It returns a promise, okay? And it returns a promise of it returns a promise of void, and the handler, it has to return a promise of void, so that should work. So that means that in the controller, we can do something like that. Okay, let me. In fact, because it's exactly the same way that in Symfony, instead of passing the request, we can pass the key and we can pass the value. I'm going to make something that should be something not doable at all in the history of PHP and web development. That is something like that. Put values, key. Yeah. Yeah, perfect. Please don't do that never in your life. It's shame, okay? But it's my shame. It's my video, and I can be ashamed. I can do as shame as I want. Okay. So yeah, so of course. Please. So you can do that. Okay. So because it returns a promise, even with void, we can do that. Instead of having something here, we don't have anything. So after doing that execution, we can, what we should do here. What is actually missing here in that controller? Two things. Okay. In fact, in that response, in Drift PHP, you can do several kind of responses. You can return a response of Symfony. So in that case, it's going to be something like that, for example. Okay. But if you return a Symfony response, the kernel is going to take that response and it's going to dispatch the kernel events that are actually thrown after your returning response from the controller. Symfony have some events after that statement. But if you want to go efficiently, you can actually return a React PHP response. and the kernel is not going to throw anything else. It's going to pass that response directly to the server. Okay, so something like that. It's going to be faster, more efficient. That's it. In fact, that's it. Okay. What else? We can go for the other endpoint, and you know the magic after that. And git key get. I'm going to go fast. Get. Instead of command bus, because it's a get, instead of that is query bus. In fact, I'm going to it should work. No, wait. Okay. So instead of having here the value, we only have the key. And instead of making execute, the method is ask. So we have here a new folder in domain that it's called query, and there is another one that it's called query bus. A query handler. It doesn't mean that each class needs a folder. I mean, that's it. Then now you can have 40 query handlers and 40 command handlers. You don't need to create one folder for file. So in that case, we have get value, that it's private string key, a constructor, and a getter. Perfect. And after that, we have here get value handler. So we have here public function handler, get value. Okay, and in that case, we have exactly the same here. We have a private key value repository, key value repository, and we have here the constructor. That's it. And something happening here. Perfect. Exactly. So what we are actually doing the same that before, and instead of calling the put, we're going to make the key with the get value get key. So what happens here? That handler, we're going to expect both a value and both an exception. So it's actually, we should put it the promise, and I think in that case is exactly the same. We have a string or a key not found exception, right? Okay, that means that in terms of result in the promise, now we are expecting something. So in the controller, if we do something like that, what we will have is that in that then we are going to expect something. Okay, what's going on here? What's the problem here? Oh no, it's not put. Get value. So in that then we are going to expect always a value. Why I'm saying always? Because when you make a then, you're going to capture the result of the previous promise. So why if the previous promise, instead of returning a value, it's throwing you an exception. That's a good point, basically, because emulating the try catch in regular PHP, you can actually do something like that. Okay, that's the main difference. So you can actually capture exceptions by using the otherwise method. In fact, you can do something like that. So you want to capture, first of all, that exception, and after that, all the other exceptions. And you could actually create another then here. I mean, you can chain otherwises and then that it's proper, it's completely doable. So in that case, for example, you want to make, if you have a function here, you have a 200, then you can put here the value. And if you have an exception here, it means that you have a 404. So you need to pass that key by reference, and if there is another kind of exception, it's going to be 500. And okay, and that's it. I mean, that's exactly how a controller on React PHP works. So of course, this is not going to work, basically, because there's something that, I mean, there's nothing here. In fact, we need to. So to make it work, first of all, we need to, let me check one thing, please. If you go to make all the handlers to be discovered, you can go to this repository, okay, the DriftPHP/demo, and inside the services file, inside the configuration, you can find how to auto-discover all the commands and the query handlers. Okay, it's exactly the same way that in Symfony, but instead of app.path, it's app/. So in that way, we're going to discover both handlers. Okay, but it's something that is actually missing to make it work. What it is? Why it's not going to work? Why? Exactly. So what kind of implementation would you go for the first? How would you implement that repository? What would be your first step here? So you would go to install a MySQL and go to infrastructure, create a folder called MySQL, for example. And okay, I would not do that at all. Basically because I don't really need infrastructure to make that work. In Symfony, you do, because there's no actually any way of doing that in Symfony. In terms of, if you want to test that in Symfony, you should do that. Go to, MySQL or SQLite or whatever. But it's not Symfony. This is React PHP. And the good thing in React PHP is that all the requests are sharing memory. So in fact, exactly, and it's well, this is actually very useful for testing, because you can actually work with running servers and you can test functionally your API without having to configure MySQL. So I'm going to show you. If I implement the key value repository, I need to implement both. So first of all, I want to share an array of values here that is actually by default an empty repository here. So it's actually very easy, because these values of key is actually value, and because we need to return a promise interface, I can do that creates a promise. Okay, that creates a promise. There is actually having something here. The final value, the resolved value of a promise is actually passed here, but because this returns a promise of void, we need to resolve it that way without any kind of result here. In the second side, in the second hand, we have we have this. So we need to return the value if it's available. If no is set, these values of key, we need to do something. Okay, otherwise we need to return these values of key. That's good. Why? Here? Yeah? Ah, good. Exactly. Basically because we are just returning always a promise. So that's good. Exactly. That's good. Well, you can actually throw exceptions the same way that you're returning plain values if you are inside a promise. But if you're not inside a promise, instead of throwing exceptions, you need to reject exceptions. It's confusing. It's confusing at the beginning. But I think that if you do it like 2,000 times, then the 2001 is going to be much easier. So it's in fact, there's no except. Well, what happens here? Yeah. We can try it. We can actually try it. First of all, we're going to try that it's actually working as we code it, which is very important, to be honest. First of all, we need to define the way that we define interfaces. So first of all, we need to define our adapter. It's called, because that adapter, even if it's an adapter of an interface, because we don't rely on external dependencies, is actually pretty, I mean, we can put it on our domain, even if it's not, it's not actually infrastructure. So if it's not infrastructure, we can put it in our domain. So if you make repository here, then we have key value repository. That's it. We don't need anything else because it's going to, there's no dependencies, and the name of the service is going to be the namespace itself. And after that, we can, because we inject a service called key value repository, that namespace, we need to create a service with that namespace as well. And because it's an adapter, the way of doing that, it's, I'm sorry, not exactly that. This is an interface, so the way of assigning an adapter for that interface is by using an alias. This is the namespace of the interface. So in auto-warring, the namespaces are being used in order to inject it automatically. If you put something like, yeah, but in that case, you need to decide after that what, you know, what adapter to use. Maybe you want to change. Yeah, but to be honest, my path on the, you know, on my love with auto-warring, it's increasing. I really like auto-warring day by day a bit more. But even with that, even by using auto-warring, I want to keep a position where everything is not going to have magic in my project. I mean, I like that kind of magic because it's a configuration magic, but there are some points where I want to take the control. You know, and even if there is a way of doing that in Symfony, there is some parts that I want to take control, and that's one of the controls. Of course, I can auto finding that repositories. I can do that, but this part, I want to do it by hand always because it's important for me that part. So I think that could work, right? It should, yeah. But it should. It's not. Okay. There is something in. When was implemented interface instead of kernel? What the fuck is that? No, it's not a catch. Okay, there is something. Exactly. It's command bus bundle. I failed. No, the command bus bundle is it's a package where there's a command bus and a query bus. Yeah, it can be a bit confusing as well. So, okay, that's another thing. Yeah. Get value handler. There's something missing here. Query handler, domain query handler. Okay, get value. Expect to find class query handler domain. Okay. Okay. No, it should actually work. Okay. I'm actually using the app here. So in services, I need to include that as well. Okay, so let's start. If we make a curl with localhost 8877 q1 value 1, it doesn't work as expected for the first time. Okay, not found HTTP exception, not found, not root found. Okay, that's not the root. Values. Let me check. Values key value. Values key value. Yeah, it's not callable controller. That neither exists. Put key value controller, app controller. Put value. Put value and get value. That's it. Step by step. Okay, let's try it again. It seems to work right now. Okay, there is a 204. So if you were working in Symfony, then that's it. Requests and responses in Symfony are stateless by default if you don't work with infrastructure layer. But this is not the case. Even if we're working within memory, you can do that. And that's a good point. That's a good point, basically, because for testing, this is amazing. You can test your whole application if we have both the val implementation and the in-memory implementation, and you have it properly tested both with the same tests. Then you can functionally test your application by using that in-memory repository, which make your tests much faster. So now that you can do that, what if I get the K2 not found? So what if I remove what you told? You said that, right? Okay. I mean, the server should never stop, even with an exception like that. That's an exception, 500 exception. It's not actually, because you're expecting a string, right? And this is because in the get value, you're expecting here a string. So you can do that. Yeah, because in that server, each request has its own scope. So exceptions are inside the request scope, not the server scope. So even if you have exception, the exception is inside, the final. There is a kind of try catch inside the server. So there is no way where exception produced by a request can go inside the whole server engine. It's always cached. So in that case, if you do that, it should work, basically, because we're expecting a nullable here as well. Not found, that says. But to be honest, I prefer the other way. Okay, so do you have any questions? Okay, so there is now the third part of the webinar. That is, okay, if I tell you, let's create a production ready project on top of Drift PHP, like one of the projects in your company, what would you tell me? What there is something really missing here? I mean, what's the next step? No, not about security. You can actually use a security bundle for Symfony. So security is good. So what? You can test it. Remember that you have block. So if you have block, you can expect a promise, block the promise, expect the final value, and make an assertions. So you can actually test the same way that you would do in Symfony. Yeah. Yeah, you take the promise, so you block the promise, and if you block the promise, then you have a resulting. There is a library on top of React PHP that provides you that block. You need to pass the promise and the loop, and as soon as you do that, then you have the result here, and after that you can actually make an assertion of that result. In fact, there is another way. Instead of doing that, you can make, for example, if you have a resolve and you have a then function, you can actually make here an assert. Something like that, okay? So the problem here is that creates a promise. So you need to ensure that that promise is actually, that assertion is actually called before the PHP unit thread it's not finished. So the way of doing that is actually blocking the promise as well. Well, it's that, but you need the blocking here, basically because you made, then you have a promise and that's it. And you have a promise, and inside the promise is not going to be executed, never. But with that block, you can actually do that. No, the problem you will have here, so the problem, one of the problems that working with React PHP actually brings to you in your life, it's that instead of working with a very extensive and big environment built on top of Symfony, for example, I always go to Symfony because it's the most similar project to Drift PHP, but it could be exactly the same way that in Laravel or WordPress, even in Drupal. So instead of working with an enormous and incredible big environment for that project, and that means that you actually have the capabilities of working with the libraries built on top of that project. Okay, then because you have that limitation of locking operations, all that environment, it's going to be much useless, basically. So for example, you're not going to be able to work with Doctrine, for example. So goodbye ORM and goodbye deval. And this is a problem, basically because if you are used to working on top of adapters, Doctrine deval is a good way of working with adapters in SQL. Okay, and this is not going to be an option anymore. So this is a big stop if you want to work on top of React PHP in production. Are you agree with me? Well, your yeah is not. Yeah. Good. That's to be honest, that's the way I've always thought about deval, but about Doctrine. But you know, there is a difference between the deval and the ORM. I mean, when you talk about Doctrine, you talk about a big project that it's composed by small pieces. Well, let's say not that small, but by pieces. So I agree 100% with you about that, about what you told, but I would agree if we talk about the ORM. Okay, basically because the deval is not it's not a heavy layer on top of your database. You have the power of building your queries, and the deval is only a small layer that will transform your queries to a small adapter, your specific adapter query system. So my point is that I don't want to right now I'm not interested in building a ORM on top of Drift PHP and on top of deval or on top of React PHP, but I was very interested in building something on top of databases adapters that could create a small deval on top of them. And at the same time, I was very happy with the deval of Doctrine, basically because they have a very relevant small project there that is the query builder and the schema, all the schema stuff. So there is a small project that it's called I'm going to write here. In fact, there is a deval on top of React PHP. It's not people that don't really know that deval because, to be honest, there is so much work to make everyone know all the work inside Drift PHP. There are a lot of work there, but there is actually a React PHP deval on top of Doctrine deval. And that deval, I did it, yeah, I think. So that deval, what it really does is to provide all the power of query builder on top of the adapters built on top of React PHP instead of the regular deval adapters. So that means that you can actually work with Query Builder, but at the moment you can only work with Postgres, MySQL, and SQLite, which covers the 95% of the people right now. Or maybe it's 17, I don't really know it, but it's a high level. So it's pretty easy because a part of that we have the bundle itself. So you can do that. Again, bundles. And because it works with adapter, what we have here is friends of React. I think it's friends of React. Let me, 1 second. React PHP, MySQL. One moment. Oh yeah. Friends of React PHP actually is that word, but then the repository is called React MySQL, which I don't really understand why. Okay. So we install the bundle with the library, and then we install the adapter. Okay. Okay. We install the dependencies. We go there again. We install the bundle. And the val. Oh, it's not. It's not there yet. Yeah. No, it's not actually working. Okay. I think that something went wrong. No, the bundle. Okay, something is happening here. Okay, that's it. So we load the bundle, and we can start working with the library here. Okay. So here I'm going to put it in the repository again. Don't do it never at home, okay, but I don't want to spend time on that. So we have a deval value repository. Okay. And we have adapters. Okay. So the same way that it's built on the deval, on the doctrine deval, you have here a connection, but in that case it's a deval connection. It's not a drift. It's a drift deval connection. It's not the doctrine connection. So you. Sorry. That's interface. That's the interface. It's called. It's like an. Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we have a connection. Okay, we have a connection here. So as a deval, we can actually work with that connection, right? So in that case, we have to put the verb put is very interesting because people is not actually using properly. Put is like an observed, right? If you find it, you update it. If you don't find it, you insert it. So in that deval implementation, we have an observed, which is good, I think. I actually have here a. Okay, I'm not sure if. I'm not really sure if there's something. Okay, I got it. Yeah, because the deval interface, it's very at least in version 2 in the deval interface in Doctrine, it was a very couplet interface. I mean, if you wanted to use that interface, then you have to work with the internal connections, internal adapters, internal query builders. So that interface is not actually it's not actually coupled to anything. So there is some kind of tricks here to work with the query builder in Doctrine without using their adapters. Okay, let me check. There is a schema. I want to build another schema here. It's going to be called key value. Okay, and inside key value, we're going to have a new table. There's going to be keys, and it's going to have a key. Okay, it's in string primary key, and then we have a value that it's varchar 255. It's not null, okay, and it's var. But I think that's going to be enough. What the fuck? Primary key must be not null. Okay, that's it. Okay, so let's continue with that. So there is an observed. So my table it's called keys. Then because it's an observed, I need to split between primary IDs. So there is an array of primary IDs. It's called key, and I have my key. In fact, because it's a key and it's that word, I have to put something like that. And there are other fields that it's value, and then we have value. Because that adapters are built on top of React PHP, that observed returns a promise. Okay? In fact, to be sure that always return a void, I can do that. That's it. it returns void. So at the end, this is actually managed by us. Okay, do you understand that? If we don't do that, you must believe that upsert is going to return a void, which is not, I'm not pretty sure that this is that. Well, it's not, in fact, it's not important. If I do that, that's okay. In that place, it's exactly the same. This connection, find one by, okay, the keys and the primary IDs. It's keys, no, key. So what it returns is directly the row and can be empty. Okay, so if is array the row, then it means that there is something here. So because we are actually inside a promise, we don't need to actively create promises, because we can do that. Okay, because we are inside a promise. And in fact, because we are inside a promise, we can do that. Okay, that's the main difference, and we can return that. So do you have any question here? This is actually, sorry? Because, yeah, because in upsert, inside the upsert, you can have two cases. The case where you don't have it inside the database, and the scenario where you have it in database. In case you don't have in database, you need to insert. Okay, so to insert it, you need both. You need that and you need that to insert it. But to update it, you only need the second one. In fact, to make that decision, first of all, you need to find. And to find, you only need that first. So at the end, both arrays should make the whole object. But the first one should only contain the primary keys. Okay? Exactly. So we need two other things here to finish with that adapter. First of all, we need to create, obviously, the service here, the key value repository. And the second one is that because we are using auto warring, that connection should be found and should be injected here properly. So because it's a bundle, we should build that connection. And the way it builds that connection is by using configuration. So you can do that. The val connections main or keys adapter. It's MySQL because we have created. We have added our the library of MySQL in Composer. It's going to be able to use that for that adapter. So we have host, we have port, we have user, we have password, and we have the name. It's called key values. What's the name of the table? Key value. That's the name of the database. Let's see if it's actually working. Okay. The val connection, the val connections adapter. Oh, sorry, driver. Everything is documented. I'm doing by memory, which is not a good option, to be honest. Okay, everything seems to compile properly. I put okay, no news are good news. Then if we go here, we have key value. Perfect. So if I make that's value, not found. Perfect. So the main difference here is that I can actually do that. I can do that, and it's actually working. What? Oh, sorry. No. Values key not found. Okay. Mamma. Ma che cosa? Ma che cosa? Presto. Good catch, my friend. But how can it work? I mean, we saw it in database. What? You did not see it? Oh, are they? Oh, I saw that. Yeah, absolutely. I was completely. I mean, I was wrong. So again, key 1, value 1. Okay, that's another thing. Okay, key value. Okay. No, key. That's good. Key. Oh, no, keys. No. Keys, it's the table. Okay, let's I mean that key, my key, that's it. Okay, let's be more efficient. That's it. Basically, because key is not the best word for that, to be honest. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, it seems that it's not a problem here. Okay, where my key is key 1. What's the problem here? It's I'm doing the put, right? Oops, sir. Okay, Excel query while loading query. You have an error in skill 6. Check the model, blah 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 blah. In your case, where my key is. Yeah, that's default stuff. Yeah. My key value. What's the problem here? I don't see the problem, to be honest. But we are not using the key at the get one. Oh, wait. We are actually using the wait. Find one by keys. My key, it's key. Where? That could be. This is exactly that, right? Find one by table keys, and that's my key. What's going on here? That's good. I mean, that's not. I'm not saying that. Okay, let me check one thing. New window. let me check. There is an implementation here. Oh, I deleted. Wow, no. Okay, I'm not really sure about that. It should work basically because it's the time 2000 I make the same exercise, and I'm actually not seeing what's the problem here. Okay, let's start with that. Connection keys. Oh, maybe it's that. Okay, let me change that. I'm not sure that it's not going to. No, it's not going to be that. It's not. It's only the name of the service. No. Okay, driver root my key value. It's called key value keys. Okay, let's change that because that's. I think it's that. I think it's the name of the table that it's a reserved modified. Key values. Okay. Key values. Key values. Oh, why? No. Okay, to refactor. Yeah. Continue. Okay, key values. Key values, key values. Long life to reserved MySQL words. I mean, it's exhausting. Oh. Okay. Key 1 value 1. Okay. I can do that. I can do that. So if I make that, I have that. If I made that, I have that one. That's it. So I can just rerun it and I should have the same thing. And if I make something like that, okay, let me show you something. Okay, I'm going to work AB with a concurrency of 15, localhost with set values key 1. Okay, with a concurrency of 15, we have 37 milliseconds is the medium time per request, but this is not fair because we are actually working. Okay, if we do something like that, okay, that's another thing. With a concurrency of 15, we have 7 milliseconds per request, which is not good. Which is not bad, to be honest. With a concurrency of 100, we have 10 milliseconds, the first 50%, which is the important one, to be honest. If we go a bit higher, 56 milliseconds with a concurrency of 200. Try to do the same with a Symfony. I think that maybe Apache benchmark is going to break before giving you a single number. I'm really sure about that. So yeah, that's a demonstration about how to work with Drift PHP. I think that it's not that difficult if you're used to working with a Symfony. I think it's mostly the same, but in terms of performance are other numbers. Of course, memory is actually pretty stable, which is good. And I think that's it. I mean, do you have any question?